in the afternoon.
Sounds like my house.
No, I don't.
All right, folks, it is February 23rd, and a couple of things for this U.S. history class is, once again, this is a B week. Therefore, we're going to have class Friday. But for our normal Thursday class, I won't be here. I'm going to have to give some testing to some other students that day. So I'm going to have a sub, which means for you, there's going to be no lecture, no video, but I will post an assignment in the Google Classroom. So look for that on Thursday. If you have anything that's late or a zero for any of your classes, you better make sure you get it in, because next Friday is the last day for our report cards. And after that, we can't accept anything else. Can't have any grade repairs, like our super big emergency. So we want to avoid that. Today, we're going to continue on talking about the Cold War. If you remember last time we left off, we were talking about the Civil Rights Movement. And the last thing we ended off with was a lot of it's focused in the South at this time, because that's where we have what we call like legal racism, right? Like Jim Crow laws and things like that. We talked about the Freedom Riders. And then we moved on from there. We were talking about, once again, between the two factions, the USSR, the Soviets, the Russians versus the Americans. And now we have the development of ICBMs. Those are missiles that are able to go up into space and come back down on the other side of the world without warning and deliver nuclear blast. Very deadly, very scary.
Wow.
During this time also, we have the space race. And so we were trying, both America and the Russians, we had everything different economies, different ways that we went through about education and belief systems. And we were competing to see who could actually do things the best. And one thing that seemed like a very good way to do it was who could get to the moon first. The Russians were the first, a satellite. They're also the first to send up a living creature up into space. A dog, actually. A dog, yeah. But they didn't know how to get it back down. So it really bothered Americans that about 4 times every hour there was a satellite spinning over your house with a dead dog in it from Russia. And so, yeah, right. Well, I'm sorry. The Russians didn't think about animals the same way we do, right? So there was like, well, who can get to the moon first, and who can do it in a way where we can actually get our astronauts back on Earth? And so it was on. We won this, obviously, as you can see in the picture. But it's going to be a government-funded operation that's going to pin our best mathematicians, scientists, and inventors all on trying to solve the myriad amount of problems like going to space. What do you do about fuel, food, safety, air pressure? How do people go to the bathroom? There's like so many things they're trying to figure out, and what you do in a zero gravity situation. What about solar radiation? How do you get people back off the moon and back to Earth safely? There's a lot of things they had to solve. So JFK and the Cold War. Ever since the Soviet success with the launch of the first successful satellite in space, Sputnik, or also known as Sputnik 1, in 1957, Americans felt a need to beat the Russians in space exploration. And that's one of the things about the Soviets that was so strange at the time. They were able to have this massive space program, the best in the world, in the mid-50s. But they had people starving. It showed a lot of like just the imbalance of their system, to where they had these advanced sciences, but hardly anybody had access to them, because they were basically just towards these big projects, while they had problems even getting enough bread to the poor. Though founded by Eisenhower in 1958, President Kennedy called on the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, to put a man on the moon. In 1969, after Kennedy's presidency, Neil Armstrong would be the first man to walk the moon. So we made it first. And that was a really big deal. It was televised. Americans watched it on television. I remember some people, like the older generations back then, didn't believe it. Like they didn't believe you could walk on the moon. So a lot of people, especially really old people, like farmers and stuff, thought it was all fake.
They got from stage.
Yeah, I heard that there's actually people who still think it was all staged, and they're like, well, who was holding the camera? It's like, I don't know. Yes. It's like, I don't know. One of the astronauts? But then it wouldn't be the first guy there. So I don't know. So with that mystery up in the air, JFK won. So we're winning the space race, and from there we're doing other things like setting up satellites in space to collect information and stuff like that about the universe around us. We're making not just satellites, but also probes. Something that can just go out and keep going and beaming information back, even pictures and stuff. And so that's going to develop further and further, and we're going to get some things back from. The innovations that are used by NASA are going to eventually start coming to everyday people, like pens that can write upside down, Velcro, like fruit mixes and stuff like that. So some of the things that they use to solve problems for the astronauts are going to start to be used in day-to-day products. However, shifting back to more local problems. If you remember, Cuba had a communist revolution, and Fidel Castro was in charge. And while he was in charge, not only was he saying how much he hated America, but he was also like executing people who disagreed with him. Doing things like shutting down churches, taking people's businesses. It was kind of like a time of terror in Cuba. JFK wanted to remove him, especially considering it was only 110 miles from Florida. It's pretty short. That's why some people can actually jump on like these rafts made out of garbage, and if they're lucky, they wash ashore in Florida and they can seek asylum here in America. In 1961, the CIA, that's the Central Intelligence Agency, that's America's spy network, led the invasion of 1,400 trained Cuban exiles to land at what's known as the Bay of Pigs. So that's one thing that the CIA does. It doesn't just like listen to phone calls and stuff like that or pay people for information. They can also try to train people to overthrow a government. And so you had these Cubans who hated Castro. They fled to America, but they wanted back home. So the CIA gave them weapons, and they trained them and tried to use these folks to invade Cuba. And they wanted them to assassinate Castro and, get rid of communism and all that stuff. You ready? So, next week. It's I think it's the Prime Minister of Soviet Empire. Was it Khrushchev, I think? And it's Fidel Castro having a nice little communist hug. So the Bay of Pigs, however, was a disaster. All of the Cuban exiles were either killed or captured within 3 days by Castro's forces. And Castro would pride himself on the amount of times that he was able to prevent assassinations. So I think he died of old age not that long ago. It was like less than 10 years ago. So no matter how hard they tried to get him, he just kept on ticking, smoking those Cuban. The CIA would then conduct other operations to destroy roads, bridges, and factories in Cuba, while making about 30 assassination attempts on Castro. So they kept trying to disrupt things, disrupt his government, his military, his ability to make weapons and stuff. And it didn't really do him much good. Both America and Russia during this time began nuclear weapons testing again. Even though we banned it, we both started doing it again. While the Soviets built a wall to split East from West Berlin. If you remember, that was one thing after World War II that became the focal point for a while for the Cold War. Germany was split in half, free side, unfree side. And now even the city, capital of Germany, was split literally by a wall. And this wall had razor wire, it was concrete, it was very tall. They had machine gun nests, landmines, spies and snipers all along. People who tried to cross it wound up dying. So if you were trying to escape to West Berlin for freedom or to be back with your family, you're probably going to die. So some of the best ways to get through is usually human smuggling. They would like either tunneling, or if you knew somebody who had an airplane that could get over.
What is this on with the Vietnamese? Vietnamese, is that it?
Well, I mean, we'll get to that later, but I mean, yeah, this is in Germany at the time. So then in 1962, a U-2 spy plane, remember we talked about those before, so these are our jets. They're able to fly so high and fast, they're supposed to be very difficult for them to spot or shoot down, but they have very powerful cameras that can take detailed images of the earth below. Well, they found in Cuba, they're making nuclear missile sites. And so they're like, whoa, hold up a second. This island is right off the coast from Florida, and they're going to put nukes there. So that got us very, very alarmed. So nuclear missiles fired from the island would be able to revive the United States before we could even react. They would be on U.S. territory so fast that we would be wiped out before we could even do anything about it. So that was really scary. We were already on the edge of having a nuclear holocaust, a nuclear war so bad that people were afraid it would wipe out all of humanity. So it made logical sense that if you could get rid of the other side without them getting rid of you, you just go ahead and do it. So people were very scared the Russians would use that as an opportunity to just get rid of America. There we go, next one. Good. So as you see here, there's Cuba. There's Miami, just 234 miles from the capital of Florida. You can make it to all these other places so easy. And for some reason, they've got Mexico City there too. They were like Mexico's our allies, but they weren't like getting involved. They weren't like getting into it. So yeah, pretty scary. So all these places. Boom, boom, boom. Cuban Missile Crisis continued. President Kennedy decided to enact a naval blockade around Cuba and demanded a removal of these missiles. So a naval blockade is when you use your Navy to surround like harbors, or in this case, an island, and to prevent anything from going in or out. And it usually precedes an invasion. So we're really really close to having war. Then October the 22nd, 1962, 180 U.S. warships positioned themselves to stop Russian boats from carrying supplies for the nukes from making it to Cuba. So the Russians are sending in boats for these nukes to build more, to fuel them, to provide other things for them. And we send our Navy in to stop them. That's very close to becoming a shooting war. And at the same time, the president calls the army to get ready in Florida, really close to an invasion. Nuclear bombers stayed in the air around the clock, constantly ready. If America got nuked before we could react, our airplanes could at least drop some bombs on them. It was kind of like really big messaging. If you mess up right now, Russia, we're going to erase you. So, really scary. Khrushchev, that guy we saw a picture of earlier, decided to give up. And this averted nuclear war. If they would have kept it up, who knows? We probably would have reacted. This helped create the Limited Test Ban Treaty, which forbid all but underground nuclear testing. And so, like today, however, you can't do any nuclear testing on the Earth. You're not supposed to do it in the sky, on the ground, or underground. The only legal way to do it, I think, is in space, and it has to be really far from the Earth. Yeah, back then they were like, okay. You got to at least put it like under some old mine shafts or something, like really, really deep underground. One of the reasons they don't like doing that too much anymore is because it can cause earthquakes. And so, like if they're picking up. In Vietnam, the communists had gained control of most of the country. JFK responded by sending in 16,000 military advisors to help. So you might recall, there were problems in Vietnam earlier, but President Eisenhower was like, no, let's stay out of there. That's way too deadly. It'll get serious. We'll lose a lot of American lives. And he didn't think it was going to be a winnable war, right? But JFK decided that maybe this was something that we should do in order to have allies in the area. And you remember they had the domino theory. If one country becomes communist, all the others around them will, and that'll jeopardize our freedom. And military advisors are like this. We still use them today. You send soldiers to a place, and they're not supposed to go out and straight up fight your enemy. They're supposed to just help your friends, like with supplies, maybe security, but mostly training and directing and maybe even leadership. But they're not supposed to be the guys out there on the front line doing the actual fighting. But it's a slippery slope, to say the least. And so we're like, hey, got to stop communism. We get involved there, and then we're going to see it's going to kind of slide out of control, and it's going to be a full-on war. We got one more slide to do after this one, and we'll call it good. All right, let's do our last one. All right. But as you may well know, Kennedy is going to be one of our presidents who is going to be assassinated while in office. This is one of his final pictures while he's in a motorcade in Dallas, Texas. while he's trying to drum up support from the Southern Democrats at this time. As we'll see, it's not going to turn out well for him. All right, so the Kennedy assassination, the last one for the day. Seeing his popularity dip within his own party, JFK decided to visit Dallas in order to gain support from Southern Democrats. Like I just said. In November the 22nd, 1963, Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald, leaving the nation stunned. And so Oswald shot the president from a tower behind the motorcade. He was quickly arrested. But after he was arrested, an old friend of his shot him while he was, I think, being walked to the jail by the police. So they were never able to really question him on his motives. There's some evidence that he may have been in contact with the Russians, but it's really kind of sparse. Kennedy's vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, became the president because that's the rule. If the president dies in office, the vice president becomes president. President Johnson entered office determined to reform the country as a whole. And Johnson would be the first president from Texas, oddly enough. He saw the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which made discrimination illegal for all businesses. So in the past, the federal government pretty much had power over things that it ran, right? So the federal government had power to stop discrimination, like say within a public park or a courthouse or something that the government ran. With the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the federal government made it to where you can't discriminate within a business. So this especially targeted the Jim Crow South. If you remember, there were restaurants that wouldn't serve Black people, for instance, or buses that would make Black people sit in the back. This was supposed to undo that. He also declared what he called a war on poverty and initiated the Great Society social program to expand education, civil rights, government, jobs, environmentalism, and welfare programs such as Medicare and Medicaid. And so he's going to see that there's a lot of crime and poverty within certain neighborhoods. And he figures that if you can improve education and healthcare and food programs within some of these areas, maybe it will lift them up and make them less crime-ridden and impoverished, and in some cases hopeless. And that's where we're going to get the start for a lot of these programs we still have today. And that's going to end this lecture today. We'll talk more about Johnson in Vietnam on Friday and all that good stuff. All right, kids. See you Friday. And